what are three must-dos that every man should do on the first date? So, two of these are going to be very related. The last one will be on its own, but they all are interconnected. And so there's actually several things that you should be doing. But if you get these three things wrong, you're going to make the date more difficult than it has to be. So the first thing that you should do on a date actually comes before you schedule the location. And that is look for the right seating. Seating arrangements are critical to setting up the right date. So here's what you don't want. You don't want to be sitting at a bench directly across from the woman that you're on a date with. That will feel like an interview. It'll be stuffy, stale. There will be no opportunity for physical connection. I've done it. It has made very good potential dates become very difficult, very immediate. And it just, no matter if the questions are light and airy, it just feels like an interview. So here's what you want to look for. You want to look for a low top tables with four chairs around them. And what you want to do is you want to make sure that first you go to the restaurant, you get there before she gets there, and you look for the best seating. And once you find the seating, it's going to be the low top with the chairs. You're going to be sitting next to her, like kitty corner to where she's at, to where you're in touching distance, not directly across from each other. So when I'm going on a first date, I'll Google locations that looks like a good location, and I will base my decision based on some of the reviews and and different factors. But one of the primary things, if not the primary thing I'm looking for, is their seating arrangements. Do they have that? Preferably low top, not high top, and you don't want benches. So that's tip number one. Tip number two is that when you're actually seating her, you're not seating her where she is facing the front door or she's facing the kitchen. There's a lot of commotion, a lot of distractions, and you want to make this as an undivided attention moment as possible. You want to make this as easy as possible for the both of you. So preferably she's facing somewhere that's a little bit more quiet, a quiet background. Maybe it's a wall. Maybe it's just subtle seating in the corner, but nothing that's there's not a lot of momentum, movement, and commotion in the background. And you also don't want to have your back to the door. You want to have some sense of observation as to what's going on and just be aware of how busy it's getting, things like that, so that you can, determine what the next steps are for this date. So that's number two. So number one is you want to pick the location based on the best seating arrangements. You want to get there early and pick the good seats. Number two is you want to make sure that she's not facing somewhere that's overly distracting. And number three, this is subtle, but this is just a subtle component of escalating a date to see if it's more than just platonic, and that is subtle touch. So if you are sitting next to a woman and maybe you're talking, I'll give you an example. This wasn't actually in person last night, but I was on a phone conversation, pre-arranging a date, and the woman I was talking to was talking about how her horse of 17 years had passed away fairly recently. Had I been sitting next to her at a table having drinks, I would have just touched her arm and asked her, how does that make you feel? Like, how did that make you feel? That had to be hard. 17 years, sincerely, is like, this is a family member. And so that had to be difficult. And I want to show some levels of compassion. I also want to see how receptive she is to touch. It can also give you some indicators of her own interest. If she pulls away or she doesn't reciprocate it later in the conversation, then there may not be the mutual attraction. If she doesn't reciprocate it, doesn't necessarily mean it. But if she pulls away, there are some things there that you want to be aware of and not push it too far. But if it's being reciprocated, if she's allowing it and she's doing it back, then typically that means the date's escalating to show mutual interest. And maybe after that, a nice walk and conversation could lead to a wonderful night. And so those are the three very subtle things but they can make or break a date in seconds. So you want to make sure seating's right. You want to make sure the way she's facing is correct, and you want to be within just subtle touching distance. So those are your 3 tips. I'm telling you, do those, and it'll begin to change the way your first dates go.